Maches Amud Beis, the last three lines of the Yamud. We're going back here to the Machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua on the Mishnah regarding things that you prepare for the Korban Pesach. So the Shechita of the Korban Pesach, the Zrike, the Aktara, that's certainly Deiche Shabbos. The question is, what happens with things that you have to prepare in advance, to bring it, to carry it, to bring it out of the Tchum, to remove a wart for it to be able to be brought as a carbon. And those things are only Asam B'Derabanan. So are you allowed to do those Yisurim B'Derabanan to prepare it for the Korban Pesach? So Rabbi Eliezer said yes. If the Shechita is Deiche, for sure the Shvus of preparing it is Deiche as well. And then Rabbi Yeshua answered Rabbi Eliezer and said, let's look at Yontif. When it comes to Yontif, so the Shechita of an animal is Deiche, you can shech to eat on Yontif, but a Shvus is not Deiche Yontif. The shvus to prepare it from before is not Deiche Yontif. Only the shechita itself is Deiche Yontif. So therefore he brings a raya from that we can say the same thing over here. What did it say in the Mishnah? So Rabbi Eliezer told Rabbi Yeshua, how could you bring me a raya from the shechita of an animal on Yontif, which is just something that's voluntary, that's rishus? I'm talking about a mitzvah. I'm talking about the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. So regarding a mitzvah, if the shechita is deiches and then the shvus is also deiches, so why are you bringing me a raya from Yontiv, which is only a rishus? That was the Mishnah. So now the Gemara says that really Rabbi Yeshua's raya was a good raya. Ravashi says Ravashi ulamai de ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer nami. Even according to what Rabbi Eliezer explained and said, that Yontiv rishus islay, that Yontiv, it's only the rishus, the fact that you do shechita, that's in of rishus. Again, that Yontiv is a Rishos, Islay Pirche. But nevertheless, the Pirche of Rabbi Yeshua from Yontiv to the Korban Pesach is a good Pirche. And the Pirche goes as follows. Uma Yontiv Shehita by Malacha Shal Rishos. When it comes to Yontiv, so we see that the Torah was more lenient. It allows you to shecht even something which is a Rishos. Not just for a mitzvah of Korban Pesach, but even the Rishos is allowed to eat. But loy hit the shvus sheima. Nevertheless, the shvus that's a rishus that comes along with it, the Torah was not matter. The chachama were not matter. They were only matter the shchita. So Shabbos shalei hit ba ela malacha shel mitzvah. When it comes erev Pesach that falls out in Shabbos, so over here we were not as lenient. The Torah is only being matter the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach for the shchita, but the mitzvah we were matter. Ein adin. It's only the mitzvah that we will matter, that is. Ein edin shleitate shvus she'ima. So doesn't it make sense that the shvus that comes along with it should not be permitted? In other words, in each place you have to look accordingly. There's by Yontif, they were matter the shvus. The shvus that comes along with the shvus, they were not matter. So let's say over here, this is similar. Over here they were matter the shchita for a mitzvah. The shvus that's needed in order to be able to do this shchita, they were not matter. So it's true, it's different, but in each place accordingly, we can see that the shvus, chachamim, are not matter. But Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says, no, it doesn't work that way. Shvus the mitzvah odeflei. When it comes to a shvus, which is a issa d'Rabbanan, that is needed to be able to do a mitzvah, that's different. That's a different story. In other words, what he's saying is, you can't compare and say in each place accordingly, I see that just like the shvus there, they weren't matter, the shvus here, they weren't matter. When it comes to a shvus that's for the purpose of a mitzvah, maybe Chachamim did not say there is. A shvus in a case of rishus, Chachamim said there is. In a case where the shvus is a mitzvah, Chachamim want you to do their mitzvah, so Chachamim never made the gzeir in the first place. They want you to be able to do the mitzvah. So therefore Rabbi Eliezer says you can't bring any rayas from a place of a shvus if it's for a rishus, if for here it's a shvus of a mitzvah. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said as follows. He brought a raya to his opinion that the preparations you have to do for the carbon, Isam Rabbanon, you're allowed to do those preparations. And he said as follows, Umali, what difference is there to me? Imdochu machshire mitzvah. If those things that you're doing as a machshir to the mitzvah, meaning it's not the mitzvah itself, it's just things that come along with the mitzvah, shala achar shchita, that are done after the shchita, so those things are deiches, a Shabbos, this avidle mitzvah, and the mitzvah was already done. So Rashi explains, what is he referring to? What's Deiche Shabbos even after the Shechita, even though the mitzvah is already done? So this is what it mentions in the Mishnah. We learned in the Gemara about this. Michui krovov, to clean out the waste that's inside the animal. That's not necessary for the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah is done. The Shechita, the Zrika, the Aktar, it's all done. But nevertheless, Chachamim allowed you to clean out the waste that's inside the animal. So if so, just like that's true, after the mitzvah is done, so lo yitchu machshire mitzvah shalifnei shchitas Shabbos. So the machshir of the mitzvah should not be pushing off Shabbos before the shchita. What's the difference between before or after? That was his raya. So Tosfos over here has a little bit of a different shot, because Tosfos says there's a simple difference. It comes to cleaning out the waste, michi krovov, after the shchita. That can't be done before Shabbos. It's only could be done after the shchita. Mashenkim preparing those things before the shchita, the whole taina against Rabbi Eliezer is that could be done before Shabbos. So therefore Tosfos says the Gemara is referring actually to the haktara. The haktara after the shchita does not have to be done on Shabbos itself. It can be done all night. And nevertheless we say after the shchita the haktara is done dafka then on Shabbos itself. So just like the haktara after the shchita that could be done later all night, the Mishnah says everyone agrees that it's done on Shabbos itself. So the same thing should be said b'nigeya to the preparations before the shchita, even though it could be done before, you can do it on Shabbos itself. That was Rabbi Eliezer's raya, according to Tosfos' opinion. Amalei Rabbi Akiva, so Rabbi Akiva answered him and said, "The mali im dochu machshire mitzvah shela'achar shchita es Shabbos." So you're asking, what's the difference? Why the machshire mitzvah, those things that come along with the shchita, after the shchita, why they deiche Shabbos? I'll tell you why. Shaharei dochsa shchita is Shabbos. It's already after the fact. Once the shchita was done, so the shchita was already deiche Shabbos, so you already pushed off Shabbos to do the shchita, so then you could do everything else that follows. Toimar, but then to say the same thing, that yitchu machshire mitzvah shalifnei shchitas Shabbos, but to say that those preparations before should be doich Shabbos, before the fact, before the shchita, shaledoch sa shchitas Shabbos, when you did not do the shchita yet and you weren't doich Shabbos yet, so that we don't say. Once you were already doich Shabbos, the Torah says clearly b'mayadai that you do push off Shabbos for the shchita. So once you were already doich Shabbos, so all the follow-ups after that tchiyah can be done. But if you weren't Deicha Shabbos yet, and it can't be brought yet, there's an Issa Midrabanan to be Deicha Shabbos, so since the B'mayadeh does not apply yet, so over here it's not Deicha Shabbos. Dovar Acher, another pshat that was said, how Rabbi Akiva responded to Rabbi Eliezer. So he told him, Shema Yimtza Zevach Psul. You know why the things before the Shechita can't be Deicha Shabbos is because when you're going to shecht it, you're not even sure whether the Shechita is going to be proper or not. It might be possible. So v'nimtza mechal is a Shabbos l'mafreya. It comes out that retroactively he did the preparations for the Shechita and he was mechal Shabbos. Whereas the things that are done after the Shechita, you see that the Shechita was done and it's kosher. So now what you're doing then is following up for a Shechita that was good, that was Deicha Shabbos properly. But the Gemara says this is not a good question, and this is not a good response. Ihachi, if this is what you're saying, that the shchita might be possible, and therefore you don't do the things to prepare, so if so, mishchat nami lenishchat. So you shouldn't be allowed to shech the korban Pesach on Shabbos as well. Shema yimtza zevach psul. Maybe the korban will be possible. So how could you v'nimtza machalas Shabbos l'mafreya, and it'll come out that you were machal Shabbos. So how could you be mated the shchita itself? Elo, says the Gemara, you're right. This is not a good response. Ha amale bereisha. This last point we just said about the shchita might be possible. Rabbi Akiva said this response to Rabbi Eliezer first. Uparche, and Rabbi Eliezer asked him this question: that if so, you shouldn't do the shchita at all. And v'hada amale, and then Rabbi Akiva told him, Hach, this svara that we said before, the maliyim dochu, the point that we said that there's a difference between once you were doicha the shchita, then you could continue doing the things that you follow up afterwards, and the things that you have to do before the shchita, since you weren't doicha Shabbos yet. Here the isurim midrabanan apply, and you're not allowed to do those preparations that you could have done before Shabbos. We go to the next section of the Mishnah, which continues this discussion and here the discussion is between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva regarding a comparison that Rabbi Akiva brought from Hazah, a person that's Tomei, on Erev Pesach, and all he needs is to spray on him the waters from the Para Aduma to be able to eat the korban Pesach. So Rabbi Akiva says you're not allowed to spray on him the waters of the Para Aduma. It's an Isma D'Rabbanan. So even though it's needed to prepare him for the shechita of the korban Pesach, and it's only an Isma D'Rabbanan, but you're not allowed. So that proves that the same thing also with the other preparations for the shechita are not allowed either. What did Rabbi Eliezer answer Rabbi Akiva to this? Rabbi Eliezer says, no, I would hold that the hazah is allowed. Just like I'm saying that the other preparations are allowed, bringing it from outside the tchum and so on, so the hazah should also be allowed. It's only an ism b'drabanan. And that's the discussion. So here the Gemara brings a braisa where Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva had a discussion about this, a pretty fierce discussion. Let's see. Tanya, Amaloi Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Akiva, so what was the continuation of the Mishnah? To understand the Gemara here, you have to see the continuation of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah afterwards says over there that, okay, like I mentioned, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva were arguing whether the hazah would be mutter or not. Rabbi Akiva says it's not allowed, the hazah is not allowed. So that proves that any other ism d'Rabbanan is not allowed. Rabbi Eliezer says no, the hazah is allowed. So Rabbi Akiva says no, I say the hazah is not allowed, and in fact, Rabbi Akiva said, just like the hazah is not allowed, maybe I should learn from there that the shechita is also not allowed. If the hazah, which is ism d'Rabbanan, is not allowed, so maybe even the shechita itself, which is a ism and atayra, it's a malachim and atayra, should also not be allowed. That's how Rabbi Akiva responded to Rabbi Eliezer. So when Rabbi Eliezer heard this, the Braisa says Rabbi Eliezer responded very sharply. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, my student Akiva, b'shchita hishaftani, you answered me such a kind of response regarding shchita. In other words, saying that shchita should not be allowed. And as Rashi explains, Rabbi Eliezer is telling Rabbi Akiva, how do you answer me this way? You're making a joke. We're having a discussion in Torah, and you're making a joke. You know that shchita on Shabbos, Erev Pesach, is allowed. Everybody holds of the pasuk b'moyadai that shchita is allowed. And so you're answering me in making a mockery out of this halacha that we're discussing. You're telling me, no, the hazah is not allowed, and maybe even the shchita is not allowed. How are you answering me this way? And because of this, he said, if shchita is shaftani, you answer me this way with a mockery regarding shchita. B'shchita tehei misasai. With shchita, with slaughtering, should be his death. He didn't say it directly, but he's referring to Rabbi Akiva. Amaloi, so Rabbi Akiva responded to this and said, Rebbe, my teacher, al tachpireni b'shas adin. Don't deny the halacha that you yourself taught me while we are discussing this. Kach mekublani mimcha. This is what I have received from you. You have taught me. Hazah shvosi. That hazah is only a ism b'drabbanan, but ve'ene doiches a Shabbos. It is not push off Shabbos. Right, so Rabbi Eliezer was saying, no, I hold that hazah is leicha Shabbos. Says Rabbi Akiva, but you yourself taught me that hazah is leicha Shabbos. So as Rashi explains, when Rabbi Akiva was saying that maybe hazah is not leicha Shabbos, and maybe shchita is not leicha Shabbos either, chas v'shalom, Rabbi Akiva was not trying to make a mockery out of the halacha, that everyone knows that shchita is leicha Shabbos. He was just trying to get Rabbi Eliezer's attention. He was trying to remind Rabbi Eliezer of what he taught him. So he said something so extreme that maybe this will remind Rabbi Eliezer of what he taught him, that hazah is not Doiche Shabbos. And that was taka the truth. Rabbi Eliezer did teach him this. So the Gemara asks the question, if this is true that Rabbi Eliezer himself taught Rabbi Akiva that hazah is not Doiche Shabbos, so my time so why now was he retracting this? And he was telling Rabbi Akiva, no, I myself hold that shchita, that hazah, that is, would be Doiche Shabbos. So what changed over here is mind. Amar Ule, so Ule explains, there's a sort of a miscommunication over here when they were talking to each other. Rabbi Eliezer, ki agmerei, when Rabbi Eliezer taught him that hazah is not doiche Shabbos, it wasn't regarding a person that's bringing the korban Pesach on Shabbos. That's not the case, b'chlal. He was talking about hazah the truma agmerei, a person that wants to be able to eat truma. And he's tamei, and you could only eat truma if you're tahir, and he wants to do the hazah in order to be able to eat the truma. Regarding this individual, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's not doiche Shabbos. He was never speaking about the korban Pesach. A person to be able to bring the korban Pesach on Shabbos, Rabbi Eliezer held that it's doiche Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer taught him only regarding the hazah of truma. The truma gufei loidachi Shabbos. Separating the truma, giving the truma is not doiche Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to be misakin something on Shabbos, so you're not allowed to separate the truma itself on Shabbos. So just like you're not allowed to separate the truma on Shabbos, so too the hazah to be able to eat the truma is not doiche Shabbos either. That's what Rabbi Eliezer taught him. And now the truth is, Rabbi Akiva nami ki oisvei, when Rabbi Akiva asked Rabbi Eliezer, and he was bringing a raya that I see from hazah that it's not doiche Shabbos, so I see that a ism d'Rabbanan is not doiche Shabbos. Hazah the truma oisvei. He was taka asking him a question from the hazah of truma. That's where he was asking the question from. Shehi mitzvah. Now eating truma is also a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to eat the truma. And vihi mishum shvos, and the hazah is only a shvos, and the hazah is not doiche Shabbos, even though you want to do the hazah in order to eat the truma, which is a mitzvah. So as the Mefarshim explain, the point that Rabbi Akiva was trying to make is, just like regarding the truma could be eaten on another day, so it doesn't have to be done dafka on Shabbos. So, and therefore the hazah is not doiche Shabbos. So similar, Rabbi Akiva was saying these preparations that are isim d'Rabbanan could have and should have been done before Shabbos. It doesn't have to be done on Shabbos. So therefore, all these preparations are not doiche Shabbos. That was the question that Rabbi Akiva intended to ask him from the hazah of Trumah. But for who savar, Rabbi Eliezer thought that hazah the Pesach kamaisav lei. He thought that he's asking him a question from the hazah of Pesach, that hazah of Pesach is not doiche Shabbos. And the truth is the hazah of Erev Pesach, when it falls out on Shabbos, is doiche Shabbos. So Rabbi Eliezer misunderstood what Rabbi Akiva was speaking about. This is the pshat that the Gemara says here. But the Gemara, this is Ola's pshat. But Masiv Rabba asks on this and says, no, we see in a Braisa clearly that Rabbi Akiva was not asking from Truma. Rabbi Akiva was asking from the Hazah on Pesach, regarding the carbon Pesach. Because the Braisa says clearly, Hey Shiv Rabbi Akiva answered, Va'amar, and he said, Hazah as Tmei Meis Teichiach, the Hazah of a Tmei Meis will prove to you, Shechol Shvi Shalei Liyas B'Shabbos, if the seventh day falls out on Shabbos, on Ube'erev Pesach, and it's on Erev Pesach, Shehi Mitzvah, it's a mitzvah to bring the carbon Pesach, V'hi Mishum Shvos, and the Hazah is only a Isim D'Rabbanan, Ve'ene Doiches Shabbos, and it's not Doiches Shabbos. That's what Rabbi Akiva was asking him, not regarding the Hazah of Truma. So really Rabbi Akiva was asking about the Hazah of Pesach, when it falls out on Shabbos. And really Rabbi Eliezer had taught Rabbi Akiva that the Hazah of Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos is not Doiche Shabbos. That's really what he taught him. So the question comes back, if that's what Rabbi Eliezer had taught him, that the Hazah is not Doiche Shabbos, why over here is Rabbi Eliezer retracting his opinion and telling Rabbi Akiva, no, I hold the Hazah is Doiche Shabbos. Elavadai Hazah the Pesach Agmerei. Rabbi Akiva was taught, Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva that the Hazah of Erev Pesach is not Doiche Shabbos. V'chimi acha the Agmerei. So if he did teach him this, so my time the kaparach le Rabbi Eliezer. Why is Rabbi Eliezer asking him and saying that the Hazah is doiche Shabbos? So the Gemara says, so what actually happened is, Rabbi Eliezer, Gemara yisaker le. Rabbi Eliezer forgot the halacha that he himself taught Rabbi Akiva. V'asa Rabbi Akiva lat kuri Gemara. And Rabbi Akiva was trying to remind him what he taught him. And like I said before, Rashi says that's why Rabbi Akiva said something so extreme that maybe even the shechita should not be doiche Shabbos. He was just trying to remind Rabbi Eliezer what he taught him. Gemara, so if he taught him this, so why doesn't he tell him clearly, Rebbe, didn't you teach me? Why doesn't he tell him, correct him clearly and directly? You taught me that Hazah is not Doiche Shabbos. And says the Gemara, Savar la vayrachara. He thought that it's not appropriate to tell your teacher directly you're making a mistake. So he said something extreme in order to remind Rabbi Eliezer of what he taught him. So the conclusion here is that both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva agree that when it comes to Hazah, the Hazah is not Doiche Shabbos. So the continuation of the Gemara's discussion is going to be to explain why takanat. Why is Hazah, which is only Isim D'Rabbanan, not Doiche Shabbos, both according to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. The Hazah, so this Hazah, my time Dachi Shabbos, why is it not Doiche Shabbos? Mechti, let's see, till Tuli Ba'almahu. The Isser of Hazah is just the Isim D'Rabbanan. The Gemara uses the term tiltuli ba'alma. Some say that the pshat is taka literally. It means it's only an issue of muktzeh. The water of the para aduma is not food or anything else that you could use. On Shabbos it's muktzeh. So it's only Yisra D'Rabbanan that's muktzeh. Others say that the Gemara doesn't mean the Yisra of muktzeh. It's just a term that's used regarding Yisurim D'Rabbanan. And the issue of doing the hazah on Shabbos is that it looks like you're being misakin something. It's like you're fixing the person, making him fit to be able to eat from the carbon Pesach. So it's a Yisra of misakin, mechzik and misakin. So either way, the point is that it's only Yisra D'Rabbanan. So titchi Shabbos, mishum Pesach. Why isn't it Teicha Shabbos in order to be able to bring the carbon Pesach? And it couldn't be done before. It could only be done on the seventh day. It comes to the other things. So the Mishnah explained that those things don't have to be done now. They could be done before, but this can't be done before. The answer is this is similar to what we find regarding other things, that Chachamim were geizer not to do this because you might then carry it for Amos and the Rosh Hashanah to bring it to this person to be able to do the hazah on him. So just like we find by what? By shofar, by lulav and so on. But I guess it still has to be brought from one place to another, which is through Rosh Hashanah. Huh? It's done. Right. The para, right. No, and the hakrava of the paradum, the preparation of it is done there, right? Lufnei, but yeah, the hazah is kept and done anywhere. Yeah. So that's the issue, that it might be brought through the Rosh Hashanah. Now the question is, this is a good explanation for Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Nabre, let them carry it into the Rishus HaRabim in order to be able to bring the Korban Pesach. The Omar Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in general is Machshirei mitzvah doichenes HaShabbos. Even things that you have to prepare for a mitzvah, and even if it's an Ism and Atayra, pushes off Shabbos. This is Rabbi Eliezer's famous opinion that Rashi quoted it yesterday also regarding Milah. A bris Milah on Shabbos, according to Rabbi Eliezer, not only the bris itself is doiches Shabbos, but even carrying the knife and bringing what you need through the Rishus HaRabim for the bris is doiches Shabbos. So the same thing over here, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the hazah, even if you have to carry it through the Rishus HaRabim, should be doiches Shabbos. So what's the issue? And again, it can't be done before, so it should be doiches Shabbos. So Amri, they answered, there's a difference. Where did Rabbi Eliezer say that the hechsher of a mitzvah is doiches Shabbos? In a case where the person himself is prepared and fit for the mitzvah. Like the case of a bris milah. You have the baby's fit and ready and to fulfill the mitzvah, so you can bring the knife to fulfill the mitzvah. There's a chiyuv that lies upon this person, upon the child, upon the father, to do the mitzvah. But over here, when it comes to this mitzvah of Pesach, the gavra gufa loy chazi. At this point, he's tamei. He's not yet fit for the mitzvah. A person that's tamei is not fit, and therefore leirami chiyuv alei. There's no chiyuv for him to bring the carbon. After you'll do the hazah, then he'll become fit, and then the chiyuv will be chal on him. But at this point, there's no chiyuv yet. In such a case, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that you can't do any other preparations necessary to make him chayiv. He's not yet chayiv. Amar Rabbe, so Rabbe says based on this, L'divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, cotton, a baby which is healthy and could have a bris done, so he's chazi, he's fit for the mitzvah. You're allowed to heat up water for a bath that he needs before the bris in order to be able to do the bris, b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. The hachazile, because he's healthy, he's fit for the mitzvah. Cotton chayla, a baby that's sick and needs a bath before the bris in order to be able to make the bris, you're not allowed to heat up the water to do the bris, because he's sick. And if he's sick, at this point, he's not fit for the mitzvah. You're going to make the bath in order to make him fit for the mitzvah, so that's not allowed. Like the rule that we just said, you only are allowed to do the preparations for the mitzvah if the person is already presently fit for the mitzvah. This is what Rabbi said. So now Rava says, I don't understand what he's saying. Omar Rava, if this baby is healthy and prepared to be able to do the bris, so why does it need the hot water to be heated up for him to be prepared for the bris? If you're saying that he needs a bath before the bris, that means that without this, he's not prepared for the mitzvah. So Ela Amar Rava, so rather Rava says that according to the rule that we said before, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Hakoil Choylenein Eitzel Mila. All the babies that need a bath before their bris, so they're considered to be like sick, unfit to do the mitzvah before the mitzvah of the bris. So echad cotton body, whether it's a healthy child, vechad cotton chayla, whether it's a baby that's sick, you're not allowed to heat up the water to help him prepare for being fit for the bris, because before the bath he's not prepared for the bris, and now by giving him this bath, you're actually making him prepared for the bris, and that's not allowed. To bring the knife is an example that would be allowed, because the baby is prepared, he's waiting, he's ready for the bris, you have to bring the knife, that's allowed. But if the baby himself, the body of the baby is not strong enough for the bris, and you have to make a bath, so that wouldn't be allowed according to Rabbi Eliezer, the way we're explaining it. Okay, so now, the point over here is we have this rule that the Gemara is saying, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that if the person himself is not yet roi for the mitzvah, you can't do any preparation to make him fit for the mitzvah. That's why you don't do the hazah for the Korban Pesach. But the Gemara asks on this that we see in another place that that's not the case. Eisvei abaye orel shaloimol, person that does not have a bris yet and he can't bring the Korban Pesach, onish koris. If he doesn't bring the Korban Pesach, he's going to get an einish of koris for not bringing the Korban Pesach. Right? That's the einish for not bringing the Korban Pesach. So even though this person is an odel and he's not fit to bring the Korban Pesach, but he could make a bris. So at the time when the Korban Pesach comes, after Chatzos, when it's the zman of the Korban Pesach, he can bring, right then, let him make him a bris and then bring the Korban Pesach. So what does this mean? Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. So what do we see from this? Over here in this case, the gavre gufa loy chazi. The person does not have a bris yet. So he's not fit to bring the carbon. The katani onish kares, and it says over here that he gets an onish of kares if he didn't bring the carbon Pesach. Alma, so I see from this, Rami chiyuva lei, that even though he didn't have a bris yet, but nevertheless he has the chiyuv to make a bris and bring the carbon Pesach. So we should say the same thing regarding a person that's tamei. That even though he's tamei, and in his present state he can't bring the carbon Pesach, but he has the obligation to do the hazah, to become fit, and to bring the carbon Pesach. What's the difference between a person that's tamei and a person that's an odel? Amar Rabbe, says Rabbe as follows. Now here the Gemara brings an answer that's sort of a lengthy answer, and it's based on 3 different points. Kesava Rabbi Eliezer, so now the Gemara is going to sort of, it's having charata from the rule that we set till here, that we look at whether the person is fit or not fit, but the Gemara is going to bring up another rule to explain the difference between an oral and a tamei. So Rabbi Eliezer holds, Ein sheichten v'zarkin al tumei sheretz. You don't do the shchita and the zrike of the carbon Pesach for a person that's presently tamei. The Gemara says tamei sheretz, but it doesn't mean only tamei sheretz. It means any person that's tamei. Person that's tamei, so you can do he can be toivel, or you can do the hazah, and then he'll be fit for the carbon Pesach. But not until he does the tefillah or the hazah do you bring the carbon Pesach for him. He has to first do the tefillah and the hazah, and then you can bring the carbon Pesach for him. You can't first bring the carbon Pesach, and then later in the day he's going to be toivel or do a hazah. And then the next point is, to understand this answer of the Gemara here, V'chol she'ilu b'yachid nitche, in any case where the halacha is that a yachid, for example, a person which is tamei, so therefore he's pushed off, he can't bring the carbon Pesach, so you push him off to the Pesach Sheni. What's the rule regarding a tzibur that's tamei? B'tzibur avdi b'tumah. The tzibur does bring the carbon Pesach b'tumah, and that includes this case that we just said. Even a case where you have the entire tzibur that's tamei, but they could be mitayr themselves on that day. They could do the hazah on that day. They don't have to do the hazah on that day. They can just bring the carbon Pesach b'tumah, and they don't have to bother later to do any hazah. Right? By a yachid, so you're not allowed to bring for him the carbon Pesach until he actually toivels, until he does the hazah to be mitayr himself. By the tzibur, even though they could do the hazah on that day, so you bring for them the carbon tzibur, and they don't have to wait to be mitayr themselves. Now the final point here is, and this is the main point of the Gemara's answer, that there's a rule regarding carbon Pesach, v'chol milse the asya b'tzibur. Anything we find that there's an obligation that the tzibur is obligated to do, isa b'yachid. The yachid also has an obligation to do this. V'chol milse the lesser b'tzibur, if regarding the tzibur, if there's a status that all the tzibur has, and we don't find this obligation by the tzibur, lesser b'yachid. We don't have this obligation regarding the yachid either. And Rashi says, why are we comparing a yachid to a tzibur? Because the mitzvah of carbon Pesach was given to all Yidden together, and therefore, if we find this obligation regarding the tzibur, we apply it to the yachid as well. If not, not. So now, what's the point of this answer? So here the Gemara explains the difference between an odel and a tamei. That by an odel we say he has an obligation to make a bris to bring the carbon Pesach, and by a tamei he does not. What's the difference? So the Gemara, areilos, when it comes to a person that doesn't have a bris, the ikule tzibur areilimino. If the tzibur, most of the Yidden are all areilim. What's going to be the halacha? Amrinon luhu, we tell them, kumu muhulu nafshaychu. Go ahead and all of you and make a bris, va'avidi pischa. And then you can make be makar the carbon Pesach. So yachid nami, I apply the same thing to an individual, to a yachid as well. Amrinon lei, we tell him he has an obligation. Kum mahoil, go ahead and make a bris v'avet pischa, and then you'll be able to make the carbon Pesach. So we compare the yachid to the tzibur. Just like the tzibur is obligated to make a bris before they bring a carbon Pesach, there's no such a thing that a tzibur that doesn't have a bris could bring the carbon without a bris. The tzibur has to make a bris. So too we say the same thing regarding a yachid, that even though he doesn't have a bris yet, not right now you have an obligation to make a bris. V'ilei mal v'avid anish kares, and if not, there's going to be an einish of kares. Tomeh, however, when it comes to an individual that's tamei, the I kulei tzibure tamei inu, if the entire tzibur is tamei, so what do? Lema dinan alayu, they're not obligated to have the hazah done to become tahir. They can bring ela avdi betumeh. They can bring the carbon even while they're tamei. So yachid nami potter, a yachid as well does not have the obligation to do the hazah first in order to be able to bring the carbon Pesach. He'll just be pushed off to the Pesach Sheni. since I don't find by the tzibur that the tzibur is obligated to bring to do the hazah, to be metayr themselves in order to be able to bring the korban pesach, they can bring it betumah. So too by a yachid can't bring it betumah, but a yachid does not have obligation to do the hazah in order to be able to bring the korban pesach. So this is the point of the Gemara's answer. The Gemara here introduced now this new concept, this new rule regarding korban pesach. I don't obligate a yachid to bring the carbon if I don't find that obligation regarding the entire tzibur that would be in that same situation. Regarding a bris, if the entire tzibur would not have a bris, I would obligate them to make a bris. So I apply the same thing by a yachid. A yachid is obligated to make a bris. By a tumah, the tumah is chutra b'tzibur. So I wouldn't obligate the tzibur to make a bris. So I don't obligate the yachid either to make a to be metayr themselves in order to be able to bring the korban pesach. This is the reason why Rabbi Eliezer holds that the hazah is not doiche Shabbos and the arelos, the milah, is doiche Shabbos. But the Gemara asks on this klal. The Gemara does not remain with this. The Gemara says, I'll prove you from a braisa differently. Meisvei, it says in the braisa, Yochel lo yehei onish koris. I would think that you don't get an onish koris for not bringing the korban pesach. Ela shahoya tahoir v'shaloya b'derech rechoika. Only an individual that's tahoir and he's right here in the Beis Hamikdash and he's amazed. He could have brought the korban pesach. So if he doesn't, he gets an onish koris. So I would think that it's only these two individuals, a tahoir and shaloya b'derech rechoika. Oral v'tmei sheretz v'shar kol atmei minayin. How do we know a person that does not have a bris or anyone that's tamei and did not bring the korban pesach? How do I know that they also get an einish choros? Why? Because an oral could have made a bris, a tamei could go and be toivel himself or could do azah, so they also get an einish choros. From where do I see this? Talmud loymar, so because the pasuk says v'ha ish. When the Torah says that they get choros, or the continuation of the pasuk is v'ha ish hashahu tahoir. So then he gets koris. So the Torah did not have to say v'ha'ish. It just could have simply said that hu tahoir, and that's it. Why does it say v'ha'ish? So it's including even a person that's not tahoir. He's a oral or he's a tamei, but he also gets koris because he could have prepared himself. So now the Gemara explains and says, look, what do you see here in the Braisa? The Braisa puts together a oral and a tamei. Before we were making a distinction between an oral and a tamei, and here the Braisa puts them together. So now, we're bringing here a special pasuk to teach me that a person that's tamei is also going to get koris. So what do I see from this? Kosovar, this Braisa holds, ein sheichten v'zoiken al tmei sheretz. A person that's tamei, you cannot shecht or bring or do the zrika of the korban pesach while he's still tamei, relying on the fact that he's going to do hazal later or he's going to go to the mikveh later. He has to taivel first, and if not, you can't bring the korban pesach for him. If you would say that a person that's tamei, so you could do the shechita for him, he could send a shliach to bring his korban pesach. He could do the shechita for him even while it's tamei, and then he'll go to the mikveh later to be able to eat it. So then lama leila durei aleh, why do you have to bring a special pasuk to say that a person is tamei gets koris for not bringing the korban pesach? Hainu toy. He's the exact same thing like a person which is toy. He can bring the korban pesach even while he's tamei. He'll go to the mikveh later. So Elamai, what do we see? We're talking here about a person that right now can, in his current state, cannot bring the korban pesach. He could go to the mikveh. He could be metayr himself and then bring the korban pesach. And what it was saying over here, he has the obligation to do that. Just like a person that's an oral has the obligation to make a bris, and if he doesn't, he gets koris. We're comparing and we're saying by a person that's tamei the same thing. He has an obligation to do this, to be metayr himself, to bring the korban pesach. So Alma, I see from here, afagav deloy chazi, even though right now this person that's tamei cannot bring the korban pesach, but chiyuv alei, he still has a chiyuv upon him to go to the mikveh or to be metayr himself to bring the korban pesach. Va'afagav delese b'tzibur, and even though by a tzibur you don't find this obligation, a tzibur that's tamei, what's the halacha by a tzibur that's tamei? They just bring it betumah. But isei b'yachid, by a yachid, he does have the obligation to be metayr himself in order to bring the korban pesach. Like it says clearly in this braisa that we're comparing an oral to a tamei, that they both get koris if they don't prepare themselves. So the entire distinction that we made before, this whole rule that we created to distinguish between an oral and a tamei, we see clearly here it's not true. So now the question still remains, according to Rabbi Eliezer, why are you not obligated and why can you not do the hazah of the korban for the korban pesach when Erev Pesach falls out in Shabbos? What's the problem? Rabbi Eliezer does not hold to the problem that we said before that you might carry it in the Rishus HaRabim. That's not an issue according to Rabbi Eliezer. So why don't you do the hazah on Erev Pesach? It's Shabbos. So the Gemara gives a third pshat. Elomar Rave Kasava Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion actually is Sheichten v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. That when you shech the carbon for a person that's tamei, you're allowed to. You're allowed to shech the carbon pesach for the person that's tamei. And then he can go and do the hazal later. You don't have to, even, let's say it would be a regular Erev Pesach, on a weekday. The person that's bringing a carbon Pesach does not have to be tahir before the carbon Pesach is brought for him. He can go to the mikveh later if he wants to eat the carbon Pesach at night. You can do the shechita even for a person that's tamei. And v'hu adin l'tmei meis b'shvi shaloi. At tmei meis, on the 7th day, he'll do the hazal later. So hazal lamai. So the only reason that you would need the hazal later is la'achila, to be able to eat the carbon Pesach. Says the Gemara, achilas psachim loy ma'akfeh. According to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, eating the carbon Pesach is not ma'akiv to fulfill the mitzvah. Even if you just brought the carbon Pesach and you don't end up eating it, it's not ma'akiv, you were yaitzi your mitzvah. This is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. We don't pass it like Rabbi Eliezer. So this is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. L'chatchila, the mitzvah is that it should be eaten, but even if you don't eat it, it's not ma'akiv. The mitzvah of the carbon Pesach is fulfilled. So therefore Rabbi Eliezer holds it's not necessary to do the hazah if it falls out on Shabbos, because for the actual carbon Pesach itself, you can send a shliach. You can bring the carbon Pesach even if you're tamei. For the achila, you yaitze the mitzvah even without the achila. B'di'evet. Fragt the Gemara, Amalei Rav Ada bar Abba l'Rave. So Rav Ada bar Abba says to Rave, Im Kain, wait a minute, you're telling me that you're shechting it for a person that's not going to end up eating it, that he can't eat it later because it's Shabbos, and now we know that he can't do the hazal later. Im Kain nimtza Pesach nishchat shaloi lo'ichlov. That the Pesach is being shechted for a person that can't eat it. We know if you shech the carbon Pesach for a person that can't eat it, so it's like just like shechting it shaloi l'shma, it's possible. It says ish lefi ochlei tachaisu, has to be shechted for someone that can eat it. This person can't eat it. Amalei, no, it's not the same thing. Shaloi lo'ichlov, when we say that if you shech it for a person that can't eat it, it's going to be possible. That's l'chayla or l'zaken. For a person that's sick, he's old, and he can't eat a kazayas. So no matter what you're going to do, he can't eat. That's called shaloi lo'ichlov. Dolei chazi. He's not fit for eating. Aval hai, mechsi chazi. This person, physically, he could eat it. Tekuni hu dolei masaken. He's just missing this technicality that he doesn't have the hazah, that is not done, so therefore he can't eat it. But he, in essence, he's a person that could eat it. So therefore this is not considered to be, this is not included in the machshava of shaloi lo'ichlov that passels the carbon. So this is the conclusion of the Gemara, the reason why there's no heter to do the hazah of the carbon Pesach, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if it falls out on Shabbos, because the shechita could be done even before the hazah, and the achila, he says it's not ma'akiv. It's a mitzvah to eat it, but it's not ma'akiv. Okay, yeah, we're talking about a yachid over here. So now we go to the last point of the Mishnah. We'll finish with this today. The Gemara there said, the Mishnah said, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva v'chulu. What's Rabbi Akiva's klal? Anything that could have been prepared before Shabbos is not Deicha Shabbos. The shechita, the aktara, the zrika that can't be prepared before Shabbos, the mitzvah itself, that's done on Shabbos. That was the klal Rabbi Akiva said. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Alachik Rabbi Akiva. We paskin like Rabbi Akiva regarding the carbon Pesach. Only what has to be done on Shabbos is done, but whatever could be prepared before is not done on Shabbos. It says by Mila the exact same thing. Kahai Gavna. Same halacha. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said regarding making a bris on Shabbos, Kol malacha shefshel asaysim erev Shabbos. Anything that could have been prepared before Shabbos, ein adoiches. A Shabbos does not push off Shabbos, like Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Mila she'ef shel asaysim erev Shabbos. The bris itself that cannot be done before Shabbos, it has to be done on the 8th day. Doiches a Shabbos that does push off Shabbos. There as well, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. And it was necessary to say twice that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva, even though it seems to be the exact same point. And the reason is, if I would tell you by the carbon Pesach that the preparation is not Deicha Shabbos, Hasam, over there by Pesach I would say, Duhu machshire mitzvah, the preparations of the mitzvah, Loi Docha Shabbos, do not push off Shabbos, and the reason is, Mishum Delei Nichresu Aleh, Shlosh Esr Brisais. I don't find regarding the carbon Pesach this very powerful thing that it says by the Mila that the Torah writes the term bris 13 times. So over here it's not Deicha Shabbos. Avol Mila, the Nichlesu Aleh, Shlosh Esr Brisais, regarding a bris Mila, the Torah writes the term bris 13 times, Ein Melitchi. So I would say that this is a kind of a mitzvah that is Deicha Shabbos. So therefore you have to tell me that here as well. Viyash minan Mila, On the reverse, if you would only tell me that by Mila, that it's not Doicha Shabbos, the preparations are not Doicha Shabbos, I would say, Chosam hu de machshire mitzvah like Doicha Shabbos, by the Mila it's not Doicha Shabbos, the Lekka Kodesh. If you don't do the Bris Mila today, on the 8th day, there's no Kodesh, you'll do it tomorrow. It's Taka Shaloi Bismane, but there's no Kodesh. Avo Pesach, the Ikke Kodesh. Pesach, if you don't do the mitzvah today, so then there's Kodesh. So I would say that it is Doicha Shabbos. Tzriche, therefore, Rav Yudam and Rav Paskin, regarding both cases, that it's not Doicha Shabbos if it's only the preparations for the mitzvah.
But a lot of if it's not on the 8th day, it's still Doicha Shabbos. Let's say you can do it on the 10th day.